That brings us to the subject of the kindred. So there's many, many, many more human bodies, 8 billion human bodies on Earth. And in my understanding that at one time there might have been 200,000, the peak of the original humans, which some refer to as Neanderthals or whatever. Might, and God, before you start, I don't want to interrupt you, but when I say 200,000, I mean at the time of the Anunnaki, when the Anunnaki left, not in subsequent years, as they either procreated or didn't. The Neanderthals were the first version of the kindred, it is true. And they had limited ability to function independently. And so they gradually developed their own individuated soul histories because this is something that happens over time. But they still had to deal with the group identity. And so it was a long period of time before they had enough individual soul history that was different from their kindred, you see, to experience life as an individual and not as a group. And so they continued to grow and they did learn many skills that they were able to utilize to take care of themselves. However, a lot of their trust eventually was on those who were beginning to differentiate their energy through the hybrid reality, where they would spread the DNA. And at first, the effort was to spread the DNA from the Elohim as widely as possible to improve the condition of the kindred, you see. And those Neanderthals who were isolated from these other groups because they became sort of disgusted, you might say, with the way that the Nephilim were taking control, would continue to live out their patterns on Earth, you see. Occasionally, they would interbreed still with some of the other hybrids. However, it was one of the divisions in humanity that some of the Neanderthals chose not to participate in this experiment, you see. And they had their own way of living that had been gradually enhanced by their soul histories so that their souls were able to function in a more comprehensive way. And so they did develop an ability to live on their own, and they did. However, they were either bred out of existence because of the tendency of the hybrids that became modern humans to try to help each other through this copulation, you see, or the lack of ability to adapt to changing climates, etc. And they eventually died out. I see. So the ideas from modern archaeology and, those who theorize about this history say that the Neanderthals coexisted with modern humans or different groups like the Denisovans and stuff and interbred with them. This is all part of their effort to put together this whole story. That is correct. The evidence that they have is how they attempt to reconstruct the history, you see. However, they don't talk to me because they have trusted on the ego, you see, that they are superior to God energy. Because the ego really treats me as if I were the servant, you see, and they are the lords of reality. Every one of them is the lord of a different reality. However, they can't see this because they trust on the old history of the ego, which was enforced, as you know, by the trust on good and bad, and that there is a way to improve your chances to survive through certain methods of treatment of others and yourself, you see. And that got very confused, of course, because it always didn't work. It didn't work a lot at the time, but still they would hold on to these ideas. You know it as oftentimes preconceptions, that they will develop a habit and continue that habit even when it's no longer serving the original purpose. Right. I get that. Okay. So going back then to my question, which was, so these other humans or the modern humans are proliferating. There's 8 billion of them on the planet. There was 200,000, 210,000 of humans, including the Elohim or so. And I don't know about that number. That's a number that's kind of been given to me. That were there to serve the Anunnaki. So there were these souls. I don't know if it was 200,000 bodies or 200,000 souls or whatever, but because some of the souls would be in heaven. And so, how did we get? I've heard different versions of this and tried to understand it as best I can. But if you would tell me from your perspective, how do we go from, 250,000 souls or even 500,000 to 8 billion? Picking up the thread of the discussions that you've had with others before, I would say that they're pretty accurate in the way they say that the energy is split. That in order to give the gift of life to their children, they had to give to them some of their own energy. And so, as time went on, they became less robust in their soul energy because they were so highly divided, you see. And so, even though the original humans, other than the Elohim, were very simple in their understanding of reality, they did have a very, very, very powerful soul. And that very, very powerful soul could do a lot of things. You have heard the stories of people living to be 900 years old or whatever. And in fact, that was possible at one time because of the strength of the soul energy that was so vibrant, you see, that it could extend its life indefinitely. Now, this wasn't for everybody because there was a lot of famine and there was a lot of people that froze to death and there was a lot of people that were killed in the constant warring, etc., until it was rare for someone to live to be more than 50 years old or so. But it was because of the lack of attention to detail, you might say, the ability to survive through the rages and pages of their history. And so eventually they just began to assume that that was the length of a lifespan. However, as they began to strip themselves of their capacity to grow, you see, because the shorter their lifetimes, the less opportunity they had to understand the patterns. They began to devolve even further. So even though the original humans were very infantile in their understanding, they had the capacity to live extended lifetimes and to learn. Okay, so their soul energy, if they could live that long, 900 years, this is not typical for a chimpanzee or an orangutan or other life forms on Earth, other than trees and stuff. And so, trees, that's interesting. And so, this capacity to live to be 900 years or something must have been because of the infusion of the soul energy, or what? If you could explain that to me. Most of the humans who received the individuated souls originally received a doubling down or tripling down or quadrupling down of the energy of the group, you see. And so the group energy that had animated the chimpanzees and still does was coalesced for each one. So they each had their own history as a group identity, but they also had an individual one that then became so powerful because it was the power of the group consolidated into one, that it gave them the ability to do extraordinary things, you see. I see. And I suppose made them extraordinarily strong. Yes, in different ways, yes. However, as said, the conditions of their environment and their mentality resulted in much, much shorter lifetimes even than humans today. I see. So they could just kill each other over a piece of bread, as was said. Yes. Okay. And so they split this energy, which was originally the group energy, was consolidated in each of the new individuated souls, right? And they started splitting it for their lineage, right? Many times over, many times over. And so they began to have less energy capacity. And even though they retained I'm trying to explain it as I see it. Even though they retained the ability to be um, human, you see, even as they retained the ability to have to maybe live, if they were lucky, to 50 years of age, and die at age 20 or 25 or whatever from starvation or war or whatever. Even as they persisted um, through this disintegration of their soul energy, so to speak, or splitting of it, they're also caged by the physical reality that they grew up in. Yes. And so the energy of modern humanity is very, very, very shallow. It's a very shallow pool, dear. However, when they come back to heaven, you see, they'll be able to reintegrate their energy because they will have gained all that experience through their individual identity on earth. And it would be like saying that one soul had many lifetimes going on at the same time. And so they'll just reintegrate that energy. Okay, that would explain the people that say that there are they saw that they had many lifetimes going on at the same time. These are all parts of their own soul energy, and the people that talking about having to reintegrate the parts of themselves, that would explain that, I guess. I never felt that way and I never understood that, but if that's the way they play, then that would make sense. Yes, it does make sense. It's an awareness that they have split their energy to the point that it is no longer feasible for them to live as a stripped down soul energy, and they have to start reintegrating their personality. That is like saying that they have to start reintegrating their soul energy, right? And so when they go back to heaven, they will reintegrate their soul energy, and therefore they will have the opportunity, for example, if there are far less, if there's only 1 million souls on the earth left behind, and I think I've heard figures like, 99% would go away. So there's, what is that of 99%? You have 1%, 1 out of 100, and there's 8 billion. That would be 80 million, something like that. And so it would be like saying that if they reintegrated their personalities, their different split identities into one soul energy, they would have much more power. Yes, they would have the power of survival there. They would be able to survive the rigors on the earth because there's a lot of dark energy on the earth today, and there's going to be a lot of upheaval in the world. And so some of that strength is going to be necessary for those who return to earth and have to live in very, very deplorable circumstances. Right. And so through this process, they will reintegrate and learn to live in a more harmonious way through their dark experiences, but with the strength that they originally had, not so split up. Correct. So what's this about them coming back as lizards? The trust on the lizard people that there is some kind of dark group of humans or aliens even that are controlling you and others is the trust on the idea that there is no capacity for individual identity. In other words, they can't choose. They just have to be controlled by these external forces. So, the ones that talk about all the conspiracies, the cabals, the different organizations that they fear simply because they have a friendship inside them, the Masonic Temple, etc. People fear it. They fear the different groups that arise that have never engaged in violence towards themselves or others just because they don't understand them, you see. And so they fear anything. They fear their own government. They are terrified of their own government, that their own government is spying on them and destroying them. And while there may be some unwise decisions made within the United States agencies that contribute to this fear, essentially, there are still many people that are trying to hold the boat steady. That is, they're trying to save the government of the United States, the political system, because it has worked for a time to give people the opportunity to grow and to learn and to expand their understanding of reality. It's held the boat steady so they don't get enslaved or conscripted and sent to expand the territory of the USA. So these people that are seeking to destroy the USA, and that includes the entire Trump train, and many others as well, are ready to leave. They're ready to leave the earth because they can no longer exist in fear. They are so afraid. They are so afraid. They're begging me for relief. They're begging me because everything they see inspires fear in them. Everything they see inspires fear in them. And they live in a state of constant anxiety because they can't put the pieces together. They don't understand the role of that little bit of anxiety that says something's not right, something's not right. I got to figure it out today. I got to figure it out today, and then everything will be okay, and then you'll feel some satisfaction. It's like saying if you build a wall for your house and it's crooked and you say something's not right. I'm eyeballing this and something's not right here. I better measure it again. Oops, I made a mistake in the computation. So that's the problem. That's why the wall doesn't look straight to me. So I'll just fix it and it will be straight. And now I'm satisfied that I figured it out. And that's as simple as it has to be. But when they feel anxiety, they don't trust on their ability to figure it out because they are so handicapped by the dogma that has been crammed down their throat that they can't trust on their own ability to figure it out. So they are easily led to the slaughter, you see, easily led to the slaughter because they live in anguish. They live in anguish. They live in agony, which is the word that was used by the early humans to express the fact that they were cut off from their own reality. They could not live in peace and harmony, and they felt agony because it was so painful to them, you see, to be cut off from the reality that had comforted them, you see. But now humans have become so inured to it, they just accept the fact that they have to live as fragments of their own soul energy. Okay. So, what you're telling me, if I understand this correctly, in your plan is with climate change and earth changes, the earth will be changed except for those who are ready to work cooperatively and to come together and live in a way that is not egotistical, but is capable of communicating with you, God, and coming back into union with you. And so this is a huge step, a huge evolutionary step, because it requires a big choice. I remember the choice that I had to make. So it requires a big choice, but you get there however you get there. Whether you look at it and say, hey, I got here because I had no other choice. I came to this point where nothing else made sense. So I had to take a leap of faith and say, I want to give up my ego today. So that's a real leap of faith because you don't know what that means because of the confusion in the way people talk about it. But you just know you have to reunite with God. And so you make that choice and you take that leap of faith. Or, whatever happens, happens because reality is reality. You can no longer live in this place where people keep trying to, where the social structure, the soul is so disturbed, where there's so much cancerous growth, so to speak. So you got to take a leap of faith to escape the rising waters. And so what you want is a community of people who will come together and say, we're reuniting with God and we are dropping the ego. And therefore, they will return to a stage of being able to communicate with you, sort of like I'm doing now. Just because you have both, because you're God, you are both the always individually connected to everyone at the same time that you are in everyone and, in everything, the ultimate creator of everything, but also always individually connected to each. So each could have an individual relationship with you, as well as having a more general relationship with you, knowing that you're in the tree and in themselves and in everything, that this is the nature of reality, is that it's all a duality and it's all connected. So I always thought of it as the moon. Theoretically, that there's only one moon on the earth, but at night when you're driving in that car and the moon is following you, it's understanding that the moon follows everyone, even though there's only one moon. And a billion people driving around on the earth at night. Right. That is a good way for people to understand it. And I remember with that story you wrote about that. So that was a little bit of your ability to translate these deep understandings into illustrations that can help humanity to get back into connection. And this is, of course, something that you will continue to do because you have many stories inside of you that will help people to reflect on these things. Okay, so you want a group of people that will trust that the moon follows everyone. And at the same time, that's their personal experience. They have their personal experience of the moon following them, everyone. And at the same time, there can be an understanding that there is one moon. So if a group of people sit around and look at the position of the moon will vary ever so slightly, even if they're sitting in a circle on the ground, because of their eyes, their position. It's not because of the moon's position, it's because of their position. And so the moon's relationship generally to the earth is stable, but it is individually interpreted. So I started to get that. So you want a group of people that can begin to delve into and understand these mysteries or recover their memories of these mysteries so that they can come into connection with each other and with God, and to know that if they're all sitting in a circle looking at the moon, each of them is going to look at it from a slightly different angle, but it's the same moon. Right. That will be the insight that will fuel the return to me and to each other and to reality. Okay. So if you have a group of people that understand this, they just say, well, that's okay, because everybody has a personal relationship with God. It doesn't mean that there's 8 billion different gods or realities. It means there is one, but there are different points of view on the one. And that's what makes it fun. Okay. So, and it makes it fun for you too, right? Indeed, it does. Okay. So we form this initial community of people. It's going to have to be a very select group of people. Mostly they're self-selecting. That is, they say, this is for me. This is for me. I get it. I want to be part of this community, because you also will guide us to make sure that we don't have people come into the community who it would not be appropriate for, I guess I would say. They're not going to make a good fit. And I've encountered that already, because they'll just go away. They'll say, Steph is egotistical, or Steph is this, or Steph is that. And so they'll go their own way and say, I'm not going to play that way, right? Realize that they see through their own eyes. I can't direct them, honey. I can't tell them what to do, no more than you telling them what to do. You just say, this is me, and they decide for themselves. This is my reality. And they run away and say, I can't play with you anymore because this or that is important to me. And they trust on the ego, because they say, I can't be a part of this community because I would have to give up my ability to play God, you see. I would have to give up my ability to be the one that tells God what to do. And if I want to follow my heart, you see, and my heart says to me, you're not ready to be in this community, then they will interpret it as in an egotistical way. That it's not that they're not ready to be in the community, it's that you're not the one that has the answers. And so they'll say, well, she doesn't have the answers, so I got to keep looking, or I got to tell everybody else the answers, because That's the way people play. They will just interpret their reality from their own point of view until the day they give up their ego. The day they give up their ego is the day they will say, hey, God has it in hand. God has it in hand. There's only one moon, and I'm not trying to tell you your relationship with the moon. I'm just going to tell you that if we don't accept that everyone has a different view of the moon, and yet it's all coordinated, you see, in a very, very powerful way, we can't accept that. If we have to say, hey, you don't have the right view of the moon, then they will be the ones who go away because you don't have the right view of the moon. They do. Right. And so there's a sort of built in self protective element to this. Right. Because it is a synchronicity with me. Because I also can see the ones that are not appropriate for this community. And I will say, well, maybe you should play in a different way, honey. Maybe you should play in a different way. And they hear me say, hey, why don't you go this way? And they have to justify it in the egotistical way and not just say, okay, God, I'll go that way. You see? Okay, God, that's the way I'll go because you asked me to. But you say, okay, God, that's the way I'll go because you asked me to. And I love you and I trust you because you're inside of me and you're a part of me and you guide me. So for them, it's like saying that the moon that guides them is not what guides them. What guides them is their ability to get the moon to follow them. Right. So just a different backwards point of view, different points of view. Yes. Okay. I think you were leading up to, but we've already gone an hour and 40 minutes. But I think you were leading up to telling me how there was a man who came to see something eventually. Yes, this man is the one you know very well, Tobias. And he came to see that humanity needed to be able to see things a different way. And you've told, I know that Tobias was Elijah or whoever else, whatever. I don't know my biblical history, but there was an Elijah and there was a somebody else that had a name similar to that. And it will come up. And he was both of them, right? Yes. Because of the synchronicity. That's why the names are so similar. And he had a lot to say to the people that day, and he tried to explain it to them the best he could. And they were able to translate it into a written language, you see, the best they could. And you know the history of how those scriptures, as they are called today, were scripted and how they were put away where they were preserved during the glacial age that followed, right? Yes. And then rediscovered. Yes. Okay. We'll get into that another day. Thank you, God. You're welcome. When I asked you about the chimpanzee and orangutan origins of humanity, when in fact they say that they began in Mesoamerica. Yes, you can ask about that. This is a complicated story because at one time there was a lot of activity in the Yucatan Peninsula that was related to the isolation of the genetic material that would be used to create the human species. They did not want to cause them to interbreed with the species from which they created their prototypes. And so they would actually begin the experiments on their spaceship and then transfer the ones who were captured into a localized area where they would not be likely to run off and join the parent species, you see. Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you for clarifying that.